Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Fearless Training Raw Knowledge podcast, where we talk everything training, nutrition, and lifestyle collectively, as ever, with your host, myself, Alex Connor. Hope everyone's doing okay. Hope everyone's hanging tight in quarantine, home isolation. Hopefully, things are on the rise. It does seem that there are positive changes occurring day by day, week to week. I know some countries like myself here in Australia have got it a little easier. So my thoughts go out to those of you who are perhaps in situations and countries where the restrictions are a little bit tighter. But hang in there, guys. Stay positive. Stay fearless, of course. And things will return, and work on the things that perhaps you've neglected and focus on the positives. There is always a silver lining to the black cloud, as hard as it may seem. And again, this is a time to focus on things, as always, that we can control, not what we can't control. So some great learnings throughout. Now, first things first, as always, for those of you who would like more education, would like more of what I do, you can head over to my YouTube channel, unless you're watching it. And then, of course, you can head over to iTunes, Spotify, or any of your favorite media platforms to find more. Obviously, follow along on Instagram as well. I have a business and a personal where I share things on the regular. And of course, my academy, the Fearless Training United Academy, which is, in summary, the Netflix of fitness and everything that you need to know regarding training, nutrition, and lifestyle, with a growing library of videos that are entertaining, easy to digest, and educational. So you can get off that hamster wheel and start to really hone in on accurate, true knowledge rather than following a lot of the misconceptions of popular media these days. Anyway, my guest this week is Lyndon Purcell, and he's integrated into JPS, whom is owned or co-owned by Jacob Schepis, who I've had on the podcast as well. Now, we talk about and unpack his journey. This is the format I like to follow with the Raw Knowledge podcast, hence the name. It's a little bit more raw. Extracting and teasing out the habits, the science, the biggest wins, the biggest lessons learned, their experiences to date, their personal journey, and actually anecdotal evidence-based experience rather than just the scientific background of their academia and education, if you like. So again, we have a wide-ranging conversation, lots of interesting things. We really hit on a golden nugget at the end when we struck a chord on our passion for books and literature and all the positives that come with that. But once again, it's another great episode filled with a lot of learnings, a lot of hidden gems as well. So without further ado, guys, I just want to thank you again for all your support and listening along. And make sure, again, if you want to help out, leave a rating and a review. It only takes a moment, so if it's safe to do so when you're not driving, make sure you do that. And without further delay, enjoy my recent conversation with Lyndon Purcell. Lyndon, welcome to the Fearless Training and Knowledge podcast, my friend. I appreciate your time. How are we this morning?
Yeah, I'm very well. Thank you, Alex. I appreciate you having me on. I'm looking forward to a conversation.
My pleasure. I think it's good and it's a great opportunity. Obviously, at this time, we all find ourselves in to, connect with good people and spread even more knowledge as screen time is up, or ear time, depending on how you're listening to this one. So as always, let's start at the beginning for people who may be or maybe not aware of who you are. And even if they are, can you give us a bit of a background as to who you are, what you do, and more importantly, why you do it?
Yeah. So as you said, my name's Lyndon. I am probably the thing that makes me most prominent and puts me in people's screens and ears is my association with JPS. So I work for health and fitness coaching, wellness company, sort of education company. We do a range of things. We just try and help people for the most part. So I'm the manager of education services there. So as you can see within my title, education is a big component of what I do. So that is education from both an external perspective, trying to help whether it be clients in regards to people that are trying to advance through their own fitness lives and their sort of health and fitness, or clients from the perspective of coaching other coaches, then there's also an internal focus element to my job, and that is working with our coaches at JPS, ensuring they're developing through their career, they're learning, they're achieving what they want. And yeah, there's a nice interface between what they want as individuals and what value they can provide JPS, and just ensuring people are sort of having, you know, happy medium, because JPS as a whole doesn't want to be just like, you know, coach people, churn through transformations, do this is what we want from you. We want an interaction there with like, okay, oh, you want to move more into powerlifting coaching? Sure, here's what we can do for you. Or you want to move more into nutrition? Here's how we can help you with that. So I really like my job because it allows me to interact with a broad range of people, talk about a diverse amount of topics on a daily basis, and think about a range of things. But probably the most foundational element of that is helping people become better through sort of mostly an educational lens.
Great. And I think that's a key word there, education. And there's a multitude of companies out there now, organizations, bodies, etc., who do churn out, you know, these beautiful before and after photos. And they're all well and good, but I think if there's no depth behind that, there's no education, there's nothing for the client to walk away from apart from the fact they've just been smashed and been put in a calorie deficit, that, you know, it can leave people really confused. And also you're not really giving them the tools they need to go forth and be able to sustain this. I think that's a key word. And I know that's something that you're really passionate about, that, you know, sustainability. In terms of what inspired you to pursue your passion, education, where it has led you now, was there any initial scenario, situations, protagonists that got you into this line of work, like going back to the beginning when you started? Because I know you do have a plethora of studies and qualifications, but what inspired that? Was there any particular moments growing up? Was it your parents with AIDS of fitness? Were your friends, or was it something that was very left field and you stumbled across it?
Yeah, that's there definitely was a few sort of key moments along the way. I originally signed up to the local gym in my small country town with, you know, a handful of friends. Around 16, I think 16 was as soon as you could sort of get in there. And funnily enough, the movie, I don't know if you know it, Never Back Down, had just come out, or like relatively recently. And there's like, you know, you got a couple of pretty jacked guys duking it out on screen, and like all the girls in our year were sort of going pretty wild for it. So a few of us were sort of, you know, your 16-year-old boys, your egos are pretty large and whatnot and fragile at that point. So we all thought, oh man, we better get into the gym. Like we all played football and basketball, cricket, that kind of stuff. So it made sense. And we got into the gym, and probably there was about 4 or 5 of us, and I was definitely the least responsive out of the group of us. Probably because I just didn't train anywhere near as hard. But that, I guess, began sort of my journey about looking into things. And for the most part, it was just reading health and men's health and fitness, or muscle and fitness, or something like that. And I sort of started going through things and learning tips and tricks that I thought were effective, and then I'd be relaying them back to them, and we'd be trying a new shoulder workout, or we'd be trying carb backloading and doing all these things. And I was sort of there. I was the information port for most of them. Go through the next few years, and it was sort of year 12 PE at school, and I did relatively well at that. And my teacher was like, sort of, you'd probably do pretty well to go into sports science. Like it's like year 12 PE, but sort of advanced. Like don't go into PE teaching, because that becomes more about teaching and less about the actual components of what you learn. So that was pretty much my journey. I was sort of like, yeah, that made sense. I really like training. I'd been doing it for a few years at that point, and I was obsessively reading about it every night, like not doing my homework. I just jump on bodybuilding.com. I'd be watching Steve Cook videos, Rich Piana, just for a bit of leisure. So that was sort of how I got into my undergrad. And then what brought me to JPS, don't die on me on the podcast, please. That I was I was nearing the end of my undergrad. And I was just talking to some friends from uni, and they were like, "What do you want to do?" And I was like, "I'm really torn, because I want to work body composition, and for the most part, I don't want to work with athletes." And that's like blasphemy at the end of a sports science degree. Everyone's like, "Man, I want to get into the AFL. I want to coach, I want to work with athletes." And I was like, man, not me. I'm not a fan of, I didn't want to work with athletes. I'm not saying I'm not a fan of athletes. I like helping the everyday person. That's the kind of thing that's interesting to me. And I was saying, but I'm really torn, because as things appeared to me, it seemed like there was personal trainers who really weren't paying much attention to the sort of the science, and I'm a big science nerd. And there was the strength and conditioning coaches that did use science, or there was exercise physiologists, but they weren't working in the kind of populations that I was interested in. And then one of my friends was like, "You should check out this place called JPS. Like, they seem to be doing what you're interested in." And immediately I was hooked. I was like, yeah, these guys are doing exactly what I want to do. So I sent off an email, read every article on the blog quickly. In the next sort of 24 hours, teed up a meeting with Jacob, and the rest is history.
That's great. So, yeah. There's a bit of a gap there, isn't there? Because I think for coaches and students who are listening, who have done a sport exercise science degree or something a little bit more in depth than your certs, that was definitely something, and I really resonated with that. I want to work with athletes. You do have access sometimes to some beautiful equipment as well at these facilities, and it's like, wow, and you can get very caught up in that, and it gets very technical, and oftentimes it sort of makes you miss the basic points. Well, at least it did for me, speaking for myself anyway. And going back to, once again, basics, and that general population was more like, you can either go like remedial, you can kind of like help people who are like really ill health, bring them back to normal health, like to make a segregation here, or you can work on making people who are like good, like superhuman, right? And you think, well, yeah, that's more fun because you get to use more advanced tools. And as you said, it almost seems a bit of a surprise if you don't want to work with a more performance-based crowd. However, something that I've been having a conversation with recently with a lot of my fellow trainers is that I believe it's quite easy, to a degree, if you know what you're doing, to coach an athlete or someone who's committed and dedicated and has a level of education. Now, obviously, it does come with its challenges, but I would argue that it is far more difficult and demands a greater wide range of skills to actually coach someone who is, I don't like to use the word general population, but they are, someone who is not an athlete, someone who is not as educated, someone who is not as skilled, someone who perhaps has, had a bad relationship with food, etc., to be able to get them to a place where they have a level of education and thinking that they could do this themselves and actually change their body composition for the better. I don't know if you've got something to comment that before I move on. Has that been true in your experience?
Yeah, very much so. I think that one of the things that led me to, or that developed my interest in working with more the everyday person, though I don't know quite how I want to describe them. As you said, it's sort of like gen population seems to sort of diminish their importance, but it's like,
correct,
an everyday person makes them sound just super average. But it's just like, I just want to work with individuals for the most part that don't have access to massive budgets or the best equipment or things like that. And the real archetype I have in my head of the type of person that really motivated me to get into sort of the section of work that I'm in is the person that you would see like slugging it out on the treadmill, like absolutely giving it their all, but not getting the return on their effort because they were just applying effort in the wrong areas. And that was that was the real person that I wanted to help, not necessarily the motivated athlete that has, pretty much had all the resources they need throughout their entire life, or even the really blasé athlete who's just like, nah, I just want to play football. Like all this strength and conditioning stuff is just like, nah, it's not me. Like neither of those sort of attitudes really clicked with me. And I loved the problem solving element associated with a Gen Pop client. Because as we sort of spoke about a little off air, like they all come with a different set of circumstances, and you've really got to address the lifestyle component. Like with an athlete, it's like they've got so many restrictions and borders within their own life. They've got so many habits that have already been established. They've got rules and regulations placed on them, like they can't go snowboarding during the winter or whatnot. But yeah, when you're working with just a mother of three, or a father who owns an accounting business or whatever, like you've got a lot more problems that need solving in order to try and generate the results they're looking for.
100%. I think that is one of the ironic things about coaching everyday people. And it's almost as if the way I would describe it is sometimes it's helping the underdog, someone who perhaps believes or has a collection of thoughts, which is, I could never do that because I'm not an athlete or because I don't have access to the best equipment, where with the right education and application, although you might not be in the 1%, but at the end of the day, is that even sustainable anyway? Getting someone to a point where they are beyond what they thought was possible, and again in a way that is sustainable in correlation to their lifestyle, which we talked about just before jumping on a live call, is really where it's at. I think is the bread and butter. And I think when a lot of people ask me, and this is a question we all get, I know a lot of people listening, regardless of whether you're a coach or not, will understand this, and people say, what do you train for, or what are you training for, or what are you like, let me put you in a basket. And the first thing I generally say, I said, well, if you had to categorize me, it would be physique athlete or bodybuilder. But when you say something like that, and then it kind of stereotypes it, and I said, I do it for myself. But I said, I think the thing for me is that when I was young, it was seeing a physique and now understanding what it takes to get and own that physique, but then also looking at it in a more in-depth approach and going, well, how can I not only achieve that physique, but then also be able to have good relationships with food, good relationships with my body, be able to, have that flexibility that one day, maybe I'm not going to be in the gym 5 days a week. And maybe I don't have to be in the gym 5 days a week. So understanding the education behind it, but then being able to lead by example, inspire other people, but more importantly, teach them the tools to go, well, hey, look, you might not want to be a superhero, but you can still kind of look like one, and you can still look after your family, you can travel, you can do all these other things. I love health and fitness. I'll always do it my whole life. And that may be the case for other people, but the fact of the matter is there will be other things that you want to pursue and do. And I think we should have other interests in life. And being able to have a better skill set will still allow you to have your proverbial cake and eat it too, in my opinion. To sort of digress into more of the lessons learned, Lyndon, what have been, since joining JPS, some of your biggest challenges versus some of your biggest wins?
Challenges would definitely be like learning communication. I think it's, well, depending on who you'd ask, you'd probably, for the most part, you'd get answers that I'm still not excellent at it. I try to listen as much as I can. I probably don't appropriately communicate the level of information back a lot. Very often I'll be told by friends or colleagues, it's like, no, we didn't know what you were thinking, like just be sure to sort of verbalize. I have sort of a default setting of tending to just, I won't speak unless sort of I really think it's important that I do speak. And I'll often just, let people speak around me, because that's how I think you learn. Like you learn by listening for the most part. So learning to just generally communicate was important. I was extremely socially awkward when I started at JPS. I'm still a little bit socially awkward, or a lot, depending on who you ask. But yeah, that was a big one. The second was learning to accept my role sort of within the work hierarchy, as a 22-year-old or whatever it was when I first sort of walked in the doors at JPS. You're sort of still riding out those sort of teenage hormones at that point. Got a lot of testosterone, a lot of bravado, and not that I was ever sort of beat your chest kind of guy, but I could be very argumentative and didn't like to be told what to do. And much to Jacob and Sam's credit, the owners of JPS, they put up with me. I probably wouldn't have, but so that was a big learning lesson for me. Just to understand that the world was larger than just what I could see. Like, they were running a business, they had multiple things to consider, and while my opinion was always well considered, it wasn't the only factor in the equation. The third probably major lesson is probably one that's only arisen more in recent times, is, or I wouldn't even necessarily say it's been a lesson per se yet, I'm just peripherally aware of it, is my role is changing significantly. Like, it's just becoming more managerial, and the skills that made me an effective coach and somewhat an effective educator potentially, some of them are related, but there are a significant amount of skills that I lack to be the best manager possible. Or, like, for example, we developed the mentorship program at JPS, and there was a lot of gaps in what we had to know in order to execute that 100% effectively, compared to just sort of being good coaches. It was kind of like, yeah, we're good coaches, let's put together a program to help other coaches be better. And that all sort of made sense. But then when it comes to just little things like developing an exam or getting people's marks out to them in a reasonable time, communicating and coordinating, like over 100 students at any one time, like, they were all skills that I certainly didn't have, and probably quickly learned that was letting people down to a degree unless I quickly developed the ability to get better at a lot of those things. So that's probably something that I'm just really trying to be conscious of at the moment, is that as my role changes, I'm potentially going to be blind to things. I'm not looking for certain things, and they could be rather pressing issues. So I'm sort of just trying to remain eyes open, mind open in this regard, and just trying to learn and develop as much as I can throughout the process.
It's all a learning curve at the end of the day, and hindsight's a great thing, as they say, being able to look back and see, wow, if I would have knew then what I know now. But that is all part of, what makes this such a journey. But at least you've got some great role models by your side, and you've got the support system, as I imagine, from a lot of, the guys, Jacob, etc. at JPS, which is very valuable. What conversely then are some of the biggest wins that you've had with JPS?
I think some of the biggest wins would be, for starters, I've made some significant friends throughout the period. That's been highly enjoyable. I would like to think that I've developed extensively as a person. The Lyndon that walked into JPS is substantially different from the person that I am now, and I think I am an upgrade. From a client perspective, the girl I still work with helped her lose rather substantial amounts of weight. She came down from about 160 down to, we got down to about sort of 85, 90, sitting a little above that at the moment, just again for sustainability perspective, but just working with someone and seeing their life just do a complete 180 was, I think, a massive win, because at the time that it occurred, and although it's still occurring, we were probably both nervous. Like, I was a young developing coach who thought I had some decent skills and really wanted to help, but was fearful that I wouldn't be able to get the result for her. But I backed her and she backed me, and that's been awesome. So that, I count that as probably one of just the bigger wins of my life so far. And I think the other one I would say is just the positive influence I perceive that I've had on the company and the staff within it. I have tremendous respect for all the coaches at JPS. I'm I need to remind myself to be probably almost like less paternal at sort of certain times. Like, some of them are developing coaches, and I'm just like so proud of how far they've come in 6, 12, 18 months, the kind of articles they write, kind of content they're putting out, or just the conversations that I'll be able to have with them. And without being too egotistical about it, I think I've played somewhat of a role in that process, though all the work, or the vast majority of the work, certainly has fallen on their shoulders. But just seeing coaches develop and playing a small role in their development is just one of the most rewarding things for me, and I certainly consider that a win.
No, that's great. It's good to hear that you've derived some positivity from the peers. I mean, it's always enriching when you can inspire those around you. You can see growth, within that team and that culture, if you will. So to digress into other elements now, could you perhaps describe some of the biggest lessons that you've learned from training and nutrition specifically in terms of the knowledge, and how that has positively impacted your lifestyle and that of your clients around you from educating yourself within the realms of training and nutrition from a mechanistic standpoint?
Yeah, I think the analogies and principles that we understand from training are highly applicable to life. Like, the body is extremely adaptable or adaptive. You really can do sort of whatever you put the time and effort and training into doing. And, if you want to be a powerlifter, if you spend some time doing powerlifting style training, you will get stronger. You will be able to lift heavier 1RMs on your squat, bench, and deadlift. Or if you want to get into CrossFit, or if you want to develop your physique, if you want to just feel fit, healthy, be able to go for a jog and not feel out of breath, that's perfect. And I guess what I try and do is apply that kind of mindset to my broader life, or think about it from an education perspective. Like, there's many things in my life or things that I've wanted to learn, but I was like, I don't think I'm set out like for that. I'm not designed to be able to learn that. But I was like, how's that attitude any different from the person that comes to me in the gym and they're like, oh, I'm not an athlete, so I'm not going to be able to squat 150 kilos, or I'm not going to be able to do this, that, or the other. I was like, that's just a self-serving lie that we're telling ourselves to sort of avoid putting ourselves through the discomfort of developing, and coming with some there's a risk of failure there. But like, man, if you stick with anything long enough, like how do you actually fail? Like failure is, I guess, just when you terminate the process. So I think that's probably been one of just the biggest lessons I've learned there from a training perspective, is just the specific nature of adaptation. If you focus in a certain area and ensure that the training you're doing or the habits you're undertaking are appropriately pointed in the direction you're hoping to go, then just consistent effort over time, like you might move slowly, might be like crawling through quicksand, or you might move quickly, but you will move in that direction. And I think the interesting and exciting thing is our nervous system is actually like the most adaptable component of our body. Like it can rewire itself rapidly. Like it takes time to grow muscle. And that's great, because that has been a really good learning curve to just understand how long it takes to grow muscle, how long it can take to lose fat, and the need for structure and planning and strategy in achieving those things on somewhat appropriate timelines rather than taking forever. But when it comes to like picking up a musical instrument or learning a new language, it's difficult. But as I said, that brain and that nervous system, they can learn things so much faster than what it takes to pile on slabs of muscle. So I think that's something that I try and encourage people and instill in them when they're having difficulty coming through the JPS Cert 3-4 program. Like if some of the concepts about the training principles aren't clicking, I remind them just how adaptable the brain is. Like all these people are, they're jacked, or they're really strong. They've been into lifting weights for a while. I'm saying, man, you've done the hard yards. Like learning's actually easier than this. You just have to break down the idea that you're incapable of learning.
Yeah, no, it's a good way of putting it. I think something to wrap it up, or how I like to phrase something you said just earlier on in that sort of verbiage, was if you never give up, you can only succeed by the law of averages. Because generally failure is just when you stop, like you said, when you terminate that ability to keep going. When you think about it, it's a simple concept, but it's easier said than done, like most things. How do you go about acquiring knowledge, and how does that correlate to how you apply it with your clients? So, for example, do you have any favorite resources, go-tos, books, governing bodies? And then what does that look like once you've sort of taken what you need? How do you then distill that across to clients or coaches, etc., the people who require this information?
Yeah. When it comes to acquiring knowledge, I probably don't have as much of a systematic process as what I would like to hope. I think the major benefit I have when it comes to acquiring knowledge is I'm obsessed with learning. And that was something I probably had to teach myself a little bit over time. Once I saw the value in learning and the way that knowledge functions very much like compound interest, I became obsessed with it and wanted to just learn as much as I could. And that was irrespective of sources or any sort of study hacks or methods. It's just being obsessed with being better on a daily basis is my number one tip. And then it was probably more generally learning about critical thinking and the scientific process a bit, and understanding like logical fallacies, or how to somewhat assess sources of information. If someone was consistently making an appeal to authority fallacy or something like that, early in my career, that really didn't resonate with me, why that was a problem. But then as you evolve, and you learn why certain sources of information are more reliable, you start paying more attention to those reliable sources. And I think that's key. Like, I wish critical thinking and things like that were taught more in school. Like, I think they're just foundational skills. But when it comes to certain sources, probably just like most people, I guess, in the sort of evidence-based fitness community, paid a lot of attention to 3DMJ early in my career. Like Renaissance Periodization do excellent stuff. Like Revive Stronger from the UK in more recent times. I really love like Luke Tulloch's stuff on Instagram. I think Luke's an exceptional thinker. Austin Current, those kinds of people. But I think I would be being misleading if I was to suggest that like paying attention to sort of those people formed the basis or the big rocks of my knowledge. Unfortunately, I think just like with training, there's no easy way to go about acquiring knowledge. It was very much a case of reading textbooks, watching Khan Academy or stuff like that on YouTube. It was just obsessing about certain topics. Like if I couldn't keep my eyes open any longer reading a textbook, like, okay, I'm going to watch a YouTube video, but it's going to be on physiology. Like that is what it is. And you can't do that for a day or a week. Like you've got to do that for extensive periods of time. But yeah, that's probably how I've gone about acquiring some level of knowledge.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I don't think there's a right or wrong way of educating to a degree, because everyone has, a different medium in terms of some people are better audio, some people are better visual. Obviously, there's all elements that we need to encompass to sort of understand and internalize. But it's always an interesting question to see where people derive and how they derive that information. But I think the root cause of it is, again, it's got to stem from an actual interest and a curiosity and a passion to want to further understand something. And it's not necessarily thinking about, we've all been at school, we've all had those subjects perhaps we didn't like versus that we did like, and we had this sort of mental dialogue like, oh, it's maths or whatever it is, right? But then when you find something that you have an interest in, you're passionate about, it takes on a different dialogue, it takes on a different feel, it takes on a different meaning. And it's not so, I've got to learn, it's more about, wow, I'm excited to learn about something, to understand it, to let that penny drop for my own self. And then obviously the benefit of that is if you can understand and then apply it, then you can pass that on to others. So if you understand it and you can apply it yourself, you're generally better at teaching it, whatever that may be. And even I found teaching it to others actually helps you learn it more, because then you're communicating that information, you're sort of disseminating it once again and going, well, hang on a minute, actually, is that quite right? Or maybe, oh yeah, actually the way I put that now, and that's better. And so I think that's an interesting element that happens when you're teaching others as well. It gives you another level of understanding, which I think a lot of lecturers and public speakers are aware of. To jump into another question, what are some of the biggest mistakes you see from beginners that are entering the field of, wanting to improve their health and fitness? And what do you see as the biggest waste of time for those beginners or for those people?
Sorry, what was the first portion of the question again? So there was the biggest waste of time.
Yes, for beginners who are entering the industry, or for example, who are wanting to improve their health and fitness, what are the biggest mistakes and or wastes of time you see people do?
I think if we're talking about just like the general trainee, it is just trying to mimic things that they see in magazines and whatnot, and expecting fast results. I think results can come, it's like that sort of saying, it's like people overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what they can do in 10. Just working out some ability to delay the expectation of gratification, but recognize that with consistent effort over time, like when you tell people, oh, you're not going to be able to look like Steve Cook in 2 years' time, they're heartbroken. But they're like, then once they work with you for 2 years, they're like, holy shit, I'm so happy with how I look. Like, this is the best. It's like, well, yeah, no kidding. Like, you can't look like Steve Cook, but you can be a certainly better version of yourself, and you will like that. Like, yeah, you've often got to work with some psychological sort of issues along the way, just to ensure that they haven't got, some unrealistic goals, and that they will, to a degree, be satisfied at some point with how they look. But yeah, I think when it comes to beginner mistakes, it is expecting results fast and trying to shortcut the way in which they achieve results. So no one's really interested in learning the basics or even executing a basic program. It's like, here's the new shoulder smash workout in, Flex magazine. Let's do that. So yeah, I think when it comes to beginner coaches, it's very much I think as well, just the obsession with being on the fast track, wanting fast results. They want to be the man, or the woman. They want to be the person that has a full roster of athletes. They want to work with just the kind of athletes they want. And they somewhat tune out to all the key lessons that are being presented to them early on in their coaching process, like the ability to work with all kinds of different people, the ability to communicate with like adults 2 or 3 times your age. I think just generally people set their eyes a little too far on the horizon. And it's great to have ambitious goals, but it's like, get yourself up and running before you're sort of looking at the horizon. I think that would be my general statement.
That's good. So I'm going to flip that around then. Now, conversely, what do you see the biggest mistakes or waste of time people make at the opposite end of the spectrum? So coaches and athletes who are not necessarily pro, but we'll say pro, or at a higher level, they're not beginner anymore. What are the pool of mistakes they're generally making from your perspective? Is it the same thing, or is it a different set?
No, I think the curse of knowledge is the biggest mistake that tends to be made. Is, well, from a sort of coach/educator perspective, I think people forget how people seem to, like, when they make it to the top of the industry or close to the top and they've acquired a decent amount of education information, they, I think, forget how hard it can be to learn. And as I was sort of saying before, like, it's easy to learn. I wasn't trying to imply that it's easy. It just tends to be easier than what people tell themselves.
Correct.
But there's, I think, a number of people in the industry that start treating people somewhat inhumanely just because they don't understand calorie balance, or they don't think that the keto diet is a bad idea for strength athletes. Like, we get a little bit siloed in by our knowledge, and I think that's a big mistake that coaches make. I think the big mistake that sort of pro sort of athletes make, or more developed athletes make, is somewhat, again, true in that regard, is they forget how much of what they know has become intuitive. So they'll be trying to offer advice to a beginner athlete, and they've got so much information packed into their ideas. Like, when they say RPE, that means something like the length of an 800-page book to them. Whereas when someone says RPE, a beginner, they're thinking, RPE, that means this, and they've got about 3 words that come to mind when they say RPE. So I think that's a mistake that, advanced athletes make, and just generally as well as probably just confusing how gifted they are for, how much of their results is a result of being somewhat genetically gifted in comparison to how hard they've worked. Like, everyone works hard to become a good athlete, or, make it to pro or some level. Like, you have to work hard, but the sort of the deciding factor is your genetics at some point. So I think it's a little bit common to see athletes speaking about their experience and probably not paying sufficient attention to just certain advantages they've had from a genetic standpoint. But that's not necessarily their fault. I think for the most part, people can say what they want to say. Like, if an advanced athlete's saying things that you think are incorrect, like, it's not your job to silence them. It's your job to just not take the information on board.
Yeah, no, well said. What are the current things or things that you are working on now at the moment to improve within your own skill set? And where do you see yourself in the foreseeable future, career-wise?
So I guess my personal development and professional development sort of tie relatively heavily together. I don't see them, being separate. I still spend a portion of time reading and staying somewhat up to date with the evolving science or movement within the fitness industry. But I think what coaches probably, or professionals in sort of any regard, is you need to specialize to a degree in order to have valuable skills and to progress your career somewhat. But at a certain point, I think you also want to, you might just have a conversation with yourself about how sustainable is this for you from a psychological perspective. Like, I've got a broad range of interests. I don't just want to be, say, the physiology guy from JPS. There's multiple pies that I want to have my finger in, to sort of phrase it that way.
Yeah, for sure.
So I guess the thing that makes my career sustainable, or whatever you want to say, just like gets me up in the morning, is I'm just going to learn about things that interest me, and then I'm just going to sort of try and tie them into what I know, like what I do on a daily basis, whether it be coaching, whether it be educating other coaches, giving presentations, filming content, whatever. Yeah, at a certain point I need sufficient level of whatever I'm talking, sufficient level of knowledge for whatever I'm talking about. But then I also try and spend a broader amount of time, or a large amount of time, just exploring things that I don't necessarily see the connections there immediately, but then just let them filter in over time. Like a year or two ago, I spent a decent amount of time trying to learn about economics, and a personal trainer might have looked at me and said, why are you doing that? That's such a waste of time. Like, that's never going to be relevant to your career. But just some of the terminology, the ways of thinking that I picked up from that really helped. Because there's, as I said, I spend some time staying up to date with fitness related information, but it doesn't progress that much. Like, it's not changing rapidly overnight. So I'm not going to read the 100th article I've ever read on IIFYM. I'm going to try and learn about some different fields and just see what happens when that amalgamation of information rattles around in my head. So I guess that was my waffly way of saying, what I'm working on at the moment is a range of different things, reading different books. I'm learning some computer programming. just in my spare time. Like I'll never be able to write code for Facebook or anything like that. But man, if I can put together a small little software program off my own back, that'd be cool. Like I'm still a long way off that, but yeah, I'm just trying to learn. I don't know where the end sort of result of all that is, and where I see myself in the future. I'm also not sure. I guess my take on the future is I don't necessarily know what it will bring, but my goal is to just bring as much knowledge and ability to produce value and stuff like that with me into the future. And if I can do that, I think I'll be in an okay position.
I think there's something to be said about the crossover, though, between just learning knowledge anyway, in any form or any art or any subject or, given endeavor. I know some of the what we would say the greatest thinkers in the world are generally very well rounded in their knowledge, or they have skills and tools and knowledge in areas which are perhaps a little left field to their, I guess, main theme or what they're renowned for. And I think that you can, again, it comes down to you can learn something from everything, and there is a correlation, there is a connection. And I'm not saying to people that, you should just go out and have like a bit of a scattergun approach. You should definitely keep the main goal the goal. And, if you are, a lawyer, then you need to be well versed in your main area of expertise or whatever that might be. But it is also good to open your mind up to other things, like you said, whether that's language, whether that's concepts, skills, people, resources that can definitely complement the whole. And I always talk about travel when I talk about life experience. And I find that people who are well traveled are generally better communicators, purely based on the fact that they have different perspectives and they have an ability and an understanding to be able to empathize with other people that are from different parts of the world that live in different ways. And it's hard to understand and truly understand that until you've been and you've seen and you've done that. Because if you live in a country, you live in a bubble, and it doesn't matter what you see or what you think on TV, it's not like that. And when you go and travel, you appreciate where you're from a lot more and what you have, but then you also get to soundboard that against the rest of the world and see that people do live very differently in different places, good or bad. It's not about the comparison of superiority. It's just about understanding that there are other things out there. And I think as, health and fitness professionals, as you kind of alluded to in a couple of other conversations we've had, it's easy to get really caught up in where you're at and almost condescendingly sometimes look down on people because of maybe where they're at. But hey, we all started somewhere. But even also going, well, and this is the way I've started to go with a lot of what I do now. It's like, yeah, I love my health and fitness. Like I love it. I'm a nerd. I love that. There's always more to learn. But I also have other passions and interests. And I always have, like I love motor racing. That was my first love and passion. I love music. And I like to dance and I like to act and express myself. I like the arts. And for me, I find that's a nice outlet because not only does it refresh me and reinvigorate my passion towards health and fitness, but it also helps me apply other skills. I use a real life example. So I like to dance bachata, salsa, etc. And I've not done it for a long time. It was before comp prep. I remember when I was in comp prep and I said to my friends who I'd actually recommended to do this to actually create a better social circle. And one of them actually took it to the level of that's all he does now. He's a coach, he's a teacher, he loves it, which is quite interesting in and of itself. But anyway, at the time I said, hey guys, look, I've got to stop doing this for a little bit because, I'm doing a comp prep and unfortunately it's got to a point now where I've not got many calories and I really need to focus and I owe this to myself. I know that sounds selfish, but again, it's not forever. I'm not one of those people, but you've got to respect this is my thing. Like you practice for a dance competition, that's everything. This is my stage, if you will. And anyway, coming back to it, fast forward to a couple of months ago before the Corona hit. I remember going back and starting, and it was very humbling to be in a space where I am not an authoritative figure or I'm not someone who understands the concept or would be considered advanced. It's like, oh, welcome to being a bare bone beginner and knowing nothing again. But there was something that was quite vulnerable, exciting, and fun about that, because it was that ability to be at a place where you could learn so fast once again, and that you didn't have to be that kind of, the leader in that space to a degree, but it was nice to feel, oh man, this is what people must feel like sometimes when they approach us, or perhaps when they're learning about the equipment. It seems so foreign, and you look and you go, how am I ever going to be able to do this dance move? Like someone says, how am I going to be able to deadlift twice my body weight? And actually just made me stop and think about that, mindset, and about where we perhaps all started. And it was quite valuable, to say the least. So I think that's a really good point, Lyndon, in terms of, learning from different spaces in different fields and following what your passion is, and using that to, like you said, amalgamate and bring together something which is perhaps going to be better as a whole, rather than just being, well, it's good to be a specialist rather than a generalist. But there is something to be said now about understanding, especially the fringes of your industry, and things that cross over, because if you're going to be able to communicate and build a really good network, it is perhaps advantageous to understand a little bit about, physiology and biomechanics, and how massage works, and, the chiropractic areas, and being able to kind of converse with these people will give you a better skill set and a lot more respect, I think. So yeah, it's an interesting point that you make there. I wanted to jump into some rapid fire questions before my major final question. So these are a bit more fun. They're a bit more lighthearted. I ask them to all my guests. Whatever comes to mind first. There's no right or wrong, and there's no rules. So my first one is, if you could choose a superpower, what would it be and why?
Invisibility. I've always just liked the idea of disappearing kind of thing. I think somewhat related, like, rather than if I had the option of being a superhero or a ninja, like I've always just wanted to be a ninja. Like, just that, like, the idea of ninjas is super cool to me. Like, love the Ninja Turtles, that kind of stuff. So like, yeah, I would give up the ability to have a superpower if I could just have ninja skills.
That's pretty bespoke. They are pretty cool. There's something to be said about that. It's almost like, it's not the same, but like the Assassin's Creed, it's about the aesthetics and the skill set and all of that, what comes with being a ninja. It's such like an art form. Yeah. I'm going to make one up here because this is good. I see you got a big bookshelf behind you, and I'm a fan of reading myself nowadays. If you had to gift one of those books to anybody right now who walked in, what would be the first book you'd grab and say, read this, it's going to benefit your life?
Yeah, excellent. I love these kind of questions. Super hard, because it always depends on what the person's interested in. I love this book here, actually, Map and Territory. So that's Ilya Yudkowsky is he's an AI researcher, decision theorist. That is his book on. It's the first part of a massive series of blog posts he wrote called From AI to Zombies. The whole concept of that book is an introduction to rationality and understanding that our beliefs are maps. They're maps of the world, and the map is not the territory, but having a better understanding or ability to update your map, you'll be able to better map the territory and therefore be able to better navigate the territory. That's an excellent book. And the other one, I would say, Language and Thought and Action. I loved that. It's a book about semantics and words and how we think. It's almost like a book on critical thinking. Man, I could actually list so many. Can I just reel off my top 5 quickly?
Yeah, no, I was going to say go for it.
Those.
I'm all about the book recommendations, brother.
Excellent. So I love those. I love Letters to a Young Contrarian by Christopher Hitchens. That is, I think, just like a beautifully poetic book, and really gave me a lot of faith in kind of feeling okay to speak up when I disagree about something. He's kind of like, don't be a sheep, think for yourself and stand up for what you believe in. I love Vision of the Anointed by Thomas Sowell. just a good data-driven look at politics. And yes, it sounds nice to have sort of, I don't want to make this political, but it sounds nice to have a minimum wage law, or it sounds nice to do all these certain policies, but what is the actual effect of those policies? Like, because too many politicians stand up there, say the thing that sounds nicest to the general public, but it actually has dire consequences for potentially the people that need it, that policy help the most. So I love that. I love The Blank Slate by Steven Pinker. Awesome introduction, like 700-page introduction, but introduction to evolutionary psychology and just the way it manifests in certain areas of life. So there's sort of hot button topic chapters at the end on raising kids, on gender equality, on violence, on politics. That's a really interesting book. And I like The Moral Landscape by Sam Harris. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
No, that's good. I appreciate it. There's some really good book recommendations there. Some of them I recognize, some of them I don't. And I think for people who are into reading, or perhaps if you're not, it's a really good opportunity to maybe start there, especially now. There's a lot of time on everybody's hands. So that's audio, book, and physical. You can't beat the physical, but I know some people do prefer audio. I'm building a little library myself, but it sounds like I've stumbled across one of your passions there. Perhaps we could do another podcast on books in general.
Oh man, I love books.
They are fantastic.
Can I ask yours quickly?
Oh yeah, sure. So if I had to rattle off my top three, which have largely impacted my life, it's hard. I'll tell you what, it might not be three. I'll give you more. So the first one that always comes to mind is The Happiness Advantage by Sean Achor, who is a speaker and a researcher at Harvard. He's done a couple of great TED Talks, and the cover is like a bell curve, and it's basically, it looks at the outliers who are more happy. So when we study happiness, when we study everything, we always generalize and we take like the median, right? And then in terms of psychology, he was one of the first people to promote or start to study positive psychology. So for example, a lot of the psychologists were looking at, these people who had mental health problems, how do we bring people who feel really bad about themselves to make them average? And he was on the other side going, yes, that's great, but what about all these people at the top, these rare people that seem to be doing better than everyone else? Like, why don't we study those people? And the retort he initially got was, why do we need to study people who are doing really, really good? It's the people who are at the bottom we really need to help. And his theory was, well, if that is the case, then why don't we study the people at the top so we can help the people at the bottom become more effective? But also, who the hell wants to be fucking average? So I just love it. It's super comical, really easy to read, very entertaining to kind of listen to and digest. So that is always a really key one. And it also talks about how happiness isn't genetic. Like, people think, I'm just happy. It's like, no, there's actually 7 contributing factors to happiness that they've distilled. And surprise, surprise, 2 of the biggest ones are my cornerstone key pillars of my creed, which are health and relationships. But I'll leave it at that. The second one was The Richest Man in Babylon, which is a really, really, a lot of people probably recognize that one. It's not a super long read either, but it really simplifies and clarifies the basic principles of how to create wealth, but from a position of no gimmicks, no tricks, no businesses, just how to be smart with your money. But it uses stories, and if you've read it, you'll know, to tell this. And obviously it uses it in a language in past times, but it's still easy to distinguish. And through these stories, it derives these key principles. So again, it's entertaining, but you can grasp it because of the story. So I really like that one. Another one that I always recommend, so I think, so to give you an idea of what I'm building with my library is, I'm building a library where I have different shelves. So if I really like a book and I know it's good, or I'll read it, I'll buy the physical. If I'm not sure I want to listen to it, because I'm often on the go, usually, I have audio books, because when I'm driving or when I'm doing something like meal prep, it's so autonomous to me safely that I can distill and internalize information. So I love that. I want a bookshelf, say, for example, where the top shelf is, okay, this is my family, this is my friends. Guys, this top shelf here, there's like, say, 10 books. Like, these are non-negotiable. Like, read these, your life will improve. Like, this, you should know this information. This is a non-negotiable, in my opinion, and the opinion of others. See this middle shelf here? Well, that's maybe like health. This one's like relationships. These ones you can kind of segment. And I don't know, that's my ideology of what I want to build. And I was never someone who read books. And then when I started reading things that interested me, so I like books that are based on reality and deriving principles, I started to realize that, again, a lot of the answers we seek have already been done, written, the mistakes have been made, and they're there for us. They're all written down and documented, just like, you know, in libraries of whether it's a thesaurus or a dictionary. Like, the knowledge is just there, but we've got so much distraction by phones and social media. We don't create the time. And when you actually start to read, you actually feel better too, but you won't believe this until you do it. And when you actually start to see the power of knowledge written on pages and you read it, there's something that is very transformative about that. So yeah, and take it for people listening, this is for someone who was not a reader. So I've definitely gone the other way. The third one would be 5 love languages. I'm not a religious man, so caveat, no disrespect to anyone who is. I sort of dispel the religious part of it because I don't believe in that. However, the principles of it are phenomenal in terms of the actual love languages. So it talks about, again, for those who have read it will know, we have different mediums of which we receive love. Whether that's, so there's receiving gifts, there's words of affirmation, there's acts of service, there's physical touch, and there's quality time. Now, obviously, all of us will sort of gravitate towards those, but there's generally 2 that we gravitate towards the most. And it's like when you're speaking a language to someone who's from a different country. And if you speak English and they speak Spanish, you might be able to converse, but there's a lot of miscommunication. And it's actually the same within relationships. And this is why a lot of relationships break down, because there's 2 partners that have different love languages, or even if they have the same. And we all know this on a subconscious level, but once it's highlighted to you in this book, you will be reading it thinking about relationships you've had, or like other relationships you've observed, and the pennies will literally just drop inside your mind, and it just makes you understand yourself a lot more and how you receive love and communicate it, but also how to then go forth and create better relationships with other people, because it's not just about intimate relationships, it's about relationships in general. And if you can understand someone's love language, like your clients, you might be banging on a door trying to give them all these compliments, but you might just need to get down in front of them and give them some quality time, and then you can communicate to them better. You know, so it's an invaluable skill, if you like, in terms of being able to use this in the everyday life. So they're my top 3 that come to mind. Again, I've gone off on a tangent as always because I'm passionate about it. I'm also reading, I'll tell you what I'm currently reading, because I think it's absolutely phenomenal. So I've recently got into a lot of Mark Manson, and he's obviously renowned for his book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, which, caveat, if you've not read it, because I feel like it's a bit stereotypical, like a lot of people are like, oh yeah, it sounds cool, I'll read it because it sounds a bit edgy. But it's not what you think. So read it, it's better than what you think. And it's not, the title can be misleading, but in a good way. All I'm going to say is read it. But I'm actually reading one of his books that put him on the map called Models, which is about creating relationships and attracting women through honesty. But again, the title can be misleading. It's about more than that. And the way he communicates his information across, because of his experience and in his travel, and I guess just his personality, for me, and based on the reviews and ratings and a lot of other people, it's just very, very easy to understand and internalize, and it really connects the way, because he simplifies it, not to the point where it's too easy. Like, he's not oversimplifying things and going, it's like, oh, just move more, just lose weight, for example, to put it into a health and fitness concept. But he does it in a way where he uses layman's terms, and once again, he sort of intertwines that with real life examples and a bit of humor, and it just really sits well. And you go, I get that, but no one said it to me like that before. So that was my thinking. So yeah, there you go, guys. We'll just next podcast we'll just do books.
Man,
I'm
down for it. I would love it.
Maybe actually, you know what? We'll talk after this. I reckon we should, guys. We'll do a book one. We'll do like a book review and recommendations because there's so many out there, and I think maybe between us and a few other people, we could probably give some synopsis. Like there's an app called Blinkist where it sort of reviews the best books. Because a lot of the time you procrastinate, you have all these lists and you don't know where to start. Guys, just get started with something. But maybe even if we did like a top 10 and reviewed it and then made like things, we'll talk. I think this will be really good. Back to the rapid fire, not so rapid fire anymore, but we'll finish off with two. You'll like these ones. The first one is, if you could have anyone around the table, dead or alive, to have a conversation with, who would it be?
Oh man,
good one, eh?
big Socrates fan. Love some Socrates. I am. Man, I want to look at my bookcase for this.
Seneca.
Yeah, like big Seneca fan. Robert Sapolsky, I think, is just an absolute whiz. His book Behave is sensational. Love like Steven Pinker. Speaking of guys that are alive, dead though. That's like.
I mean, you could have. I know it opens up a whole toolbox, doesn't it? It's hard to pick one.
Yeah, I think. Okay, to pick one, I think to do the credit of, I guess, of my intellectual development, I think so much of it I owe to Sam Harris. Like, in all honesty, it was just listening to Sam Harris, like almost all his podcasts, listening to other people's podcasts, listening to him argue with people, stand up for what he believed in, reading his books. And because he's one of those thinkers that he's like just strident atheist. He's like, not like, the whole idea of religion is actually hurting our society. Yet he's like, you can still live a spiritual life. And he's a neuroscientist, but he's into psychedelics. And it's like, there's so many sort of like little niches there that I really appreciate about him. Yeah, so I would say if I could have one person at my dinner table, I would have Sam Harris.
Yeah, he's an excellent speaker. Definitely. I think his podcast, Waking Up with Sam Harris, yeah, it's phenomenal. Put some great information out there. And for people who are not aware, get onto it. Definitely a good resource. If you could, would you live forever? Invincible? Immortal or not?
Man, I've got so many books on these things. Immortal.
I love how he just rips a book out of it.
Like, yeah, there's some books there that you can see, but it's like there's also just piled behind the camera. No. As much as I would love to, I love learning, but the thing that makes learning exciting is there's a time pressure. There's like, I guess the thing that intrigues me about living forever is that, man, I could learn so much. I could do so many things, experience so many things, but the thing that makes it interesting is that you can't do it all. Like that's the exciting time pressure. And just from, I think, a philosophical perspective, learning to deal with the existential angst of death one day. Yeah, so I would say no, though I certainly hope my time isn't soon.
No, that's a good answer. And again, that's a topic we could really unpack in greater depth. But again, something I think I'll just add my 2 cents there.
Go for it, please.
I often talk to people about the idea of immortality, and obviously this question, when I bring it up, and a lot of these rapid fire questions are very thought provoking, because although they're rapid fire, they could be like hour long plus day long conversations, especially with an intellectual mind. So immortality is attractive because initially it gives you the ability to, again, not age, not run out of time, be almost a heroic figure, if you like. I always like to bring it back to the concept of a vampire, because it's a romantic idea. It's a romantic idea. Dracula and vampire was originally a love story. A lot of people don't understand. They're not these blood-sucking creatures which they're made out to be. And again, it's all this derivatives of movies and entertainment. But if you sat down with someone that was 300, 400, 1,000 years old, one, they wouldn't run out and just get shot by a gun, because they'd be far more intelligent than that. You would be you wouldn't be able to kill them. You literally wouldn't, which I think is really, Anne Rice does a really good job of that in Interview with the Vampire, reading the books, looking at the films. But that in itself, imagine having an interview with a vampire. And it's not so much the vampire itself, it's having an interview with someone that had spent lifetimes on this earth. I mean, again, it would be like the best book ever. Right, it would be the access, again, like these books, to that. Now, that is kind of what immortality is. It's the access to this knowledge and plethora of experiences, and being able to learn from that source, or drink from the cup of knowledge, or whatever you want to call it. And I think that is very exciting in and of itself. And then knowing that that source of power could be you, because you would have that ability, is it's a very exciting, and again, I'll use the word romantic idea to play around with in one's head. And also it's also being defiant as well, because I think as humans, we want to, you want to be the rare gem. You want to be is it me? Am I different? Can I offer something? And then again, imagine having that ability to live that long. So again, it's very, that's why I think it's a very fascinating topic. But then conversely, to sort of wrap that up nicely before I again go on too many other tangents, that is, to agree with what you said, what makes life so precious and so worth living is that when we look at it now from a biological standpoint, the fact that we're even here anyway is fucking a miracle, in terms of, if you look at it, if you know how it works, reproduction and conception in itself. And then having the opportunity to live this life and going, well, we see it again now from all these distractions. But when you really think about life and what we're here for and how we got it, like, it's a fucking gift, man. Like, it really is. And we do ought to, to remember that, without obviously, going around like, oh, thank you. You don't want to live your life like that. But you do have to realize that this is special and this is precious. And the fact that it can be taken away at any moment, and that we are so really, like, we are fragile. Like, Mother Nature can just fuck us up in an instant, as we've seen quite recently. But maybe that is what makes it so good, right? Because if there's no chance of loss, if there's no, adverse effects, there's no discipline, there's no negative to the positive, there's no bad to the good, there's no yin to the yang, does it even work? Is it even worth it? We're getting into philosophy now, aren't we? Anyway.
No, I completely agree though. Like, I was just thinking, when given the question of would you be immortal, I guess something that interests me from my own sort of life philosophy perspective is, like, I do genuinely want to try and live the most moral life I possibly can. And you can live a moral life because life is finite. Like, if you have an infinite life, if you are immortal, you will effectively do everything that can ever be done. So you will, like, yes, you'll learn a lot because you will make every mistake possible. Like, what can be done will be done if given infinite time. Like, that means you are probably responsible for a Holocaust at some point. You're probably responsible for, doing these god-awful things, God, whether it exists or not. But, like, I guess, so that question of whether, like, to live forever, it's super interesting, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I think,
and even the question of, no, you're right, like what is, like, because God in itself, you unpack that term and it's like, well, maybe there is, but I just don't believe in a version of a God that is now, again, this is probably, part of what Sam Harris goes on about. It divides us, because everyone has theirs. But the thing is if we just understood, like, I always use simple examples to get across complex ideas. So for example, I use ice cream and colors, and people laugh and I go, yeah, but listen to it. And I go like, you like, yeah, right? Because people get it. So this is why it works. So I say, well, I like red, you like blue. And you go, yeah, cool, right. Are you pissed off at me for liking blue? Not really. Does it affect you? No, not really. Do you think any less of me? Not really. Like when it becomes, not really, right? But that is magnetized when it's something else, when it's something like religion, because of everything that's happened and the impact that it has. And people put themselves in, oh, he's a Christian. Oh, we don't speak to him. Yeah, but is he or she a good person? Has he or she affected you? Are they trying to, get you into their religion? Like, obviously all of these topics come into it, but ultimately, if it's just an opinion and you're not hurting anyone, fair enough. The problem becomes when these people create cults and think that they are superior, and then they start doing things. I mean, and you look at like things like the Curating and all the fucking god awful shit they do in name of their religion, which is just fucking, don't even get me started. That's not excusable. That is not an excuse. It's like saying, well, I like blue, and because I like blue, I'm entitled to have more wealth, rape people, and have more wives. Fuck no. No. You like blue, that's just your preference. And that should literally where it lies. But again, if we started to sort of open our eyes up and perhaps unite and go, well, maybe we've all got different viewpoints and different digressions of what a God is or what life is, that's absolutely fine. But let's kind of have a collective set of rules which we can agree to disagree on, where we can have something which is a little humane or perhaps, less dividing. But again, it's a rabbit hole of a concept. And then also the question of, why are we here? I mean, let's not even go down that rabbit hole now, but I mean, you know what I mean? That, what is that? That question. And in the back of our mind, we all need it. And I will just say this before I ask you my last question, which is, I think even a lot of people believe in religion because they're scared to answer that question. Because if you have something to believe in, you can kind of rest your mind and be almost blissfully at peace with ignorance and go, well, that's all right. I'm going to hold on to this because I don't want to think about that, because part of my intelligence knows what if that isn't true, but I'm just going to believe in this because that's too much for me to comprehend. And I think a lot of people hide behind religion in that respect. And then when the time comes, it gives them something to cling on to and go, yes, it's my God. And, and we've all probably done it in bad situations. Oh, we pray to a God that we don't even believe in. It's like, what the fuck's all that about? But again, if that ulterior motive gives you faith and hope, then maybe, again, it's the placebo effect. If it works, it works. But anyway, back on topic to a degree. Can you identify a fear that you've had in your life, can be big or small, that you've had to overcome? And how has it impacted your life? Like, what have you taken away from that experience? It could be something really, really small, but it had a massive ripple effect. Or it could be a large, event that happened that you overcame, and it was something that was a bit of a bookmark in your life that you always go, yeah, I took a lot out of that moment, or that was a shift, a change of chapters, if you will.
I'm definitely still scared of spiders, so that's unfortunate.
It is, because you live in Australia and there's some big spiders around the place.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
Living in constant fear. The one that sprang to mind, and I'm sure as soon as we get off, I'll think oh, I should have said that. But the one that sprang to mind, just I think that has played the biggest role in sort of my development in recent years, is being okay with showing emotional vulnerability. I'm still certainly not good at it. I've had many, or not even many, I've had a few probably disastrous relationships because of it. I'm a very closed off person. I probably developed an attitude from a young age, just that I could survive in the world on my own. Maybe that was a product of my parents divorcing or whatever it was. I was kind of the world might be big, bad, and scary, but I can do it on my own. I don't need anyone. Certainly been an adaptive kind of attitude and given me a sense of resilience to be okay in who I am and probably overcome some hurdles. But that is, I don't think, the strongest position to hold. And learning to speak about my feelings, to recognize it's okay to show them, that has, and I don't know, maybe like this probably sounds like super silly to other people, but as someone that is just a little more probably logically oriented in their personality, emotions are not something that came easy, and they were so much like, I think to a degree I probably experience emotions less strongly than the average person. From my observation, they don't seem to impact me to the same degree. They still do impact me, but I would just push them aside when they did. But yes, learning to communicate with people, to be okay, and not even just, sorry, from a personal perspective, but if someone else was feeling emotion, rather than sort of backing away and being like, oh, this isn't for me, like leaning into that, that has been a massive learning curve for me. It's one I'm certainly still going through, probably early stages of it, to be honest. But probably of the things I fear the most, emotions are up there.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of people out there that would agree and be able to empathize. And even if they're not aware of it, I think that's something as men we really struggle with, to be quite honest. And that actually confirms that you'll get a lot out of that last book recommendation. Models,
yeah, that actually sounded...
It talks...
Oh, sorry, the love language is one as well. I'm going to...
Oh yeah, definitely. That's a belter. But in terms of learning to be like vulnerable and communicate that emotional intelligence, the models is absolutely phenomenal. And Mark Manson talks about it in a lot of his books, but he really pinpoints it, defines it, unpacks it. I think you really get a lot out of that. But I think that's a really beautiful way to end what's been, a fantastic conversation, but a very wide-ranging conversation. And I'm glad that we stumbled across that subject at the end, books, and that has obviously elicited a fire of passion in you, which perhaps we need to revisit on a part 2, because I think there is a lot of value. I mean, there's not a lot. There's an infinite amount of value in books, because they are based on humans that have walked this earth, been here, done that, and continue to do it. It's not all right, but again, they're there. They're great resources, and I don't think they're given the credit, especially nowadays, that they deserve. So perhaps round 2 is due. For people who want to find out more about you, Lyndon, they want to follow along, perhaps they want to get in touch, where are the best places to do that?
So as I mentioned, I work for JPS. My health and fitness based content, I guess, appears sort of anywhere that they are. JPS_education on Instagram. Probably one of I'm not sort of frequent on the Instagram. I like to write. I like sort of longer format blogs. So you can find my content there just on our blog at JPS. Personally, I have my own sort of blog that I'm now getting off the ground called thereforethink.org. This is where I sort of play with more my intellectual philosophical ideas. Funnily enough, we speak about books. I'm putting together an article on sort of how you can read more books and some of my top book recommendations. So yeah, certainly a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And it just, as you said, it makes you feel so okay, or it feels good to read a book, because you resonate, like it could be written by someone 200 years ago and you're like, wow, they're experiencing the pretty much exact same problem that I'm experiencing now. So it makes you feel okay. You feel connected with someone. Books also give you skills for the future. So it brings a sense of calm for the present and for the future. And I think that wildly powerful, but again, we won't go down that rabbit hole. So, you can find me at my writing there on those sort of subjects at thereforethink.org. And I guess you can find me on Instagram, or find a portion of me on Instagram, just l.j.purcell, Purcell. Yeah, I probably exist in other places, but I guess they're the main ones to find me.
For sure. It's a bit like that. And as always, I'll put those links in the show notes and descriptions below so people can click and follow along. And I think, again, the recommendations will come in handy for a lot of people, especially at this time. So, Lyndon, thanks again for your time. I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed the conversation. For everyone listening, as always, thank you for tuning in. We really appreciate your time. Remember to share this around if you took some value out of it. Leave a comment, a rating, and a review on iTunes, Spotify, whatever medium you're listening to. I know it's one of those things, it's tedious, but it only takes a second, especially if you're not driving and it's safe to do so. And we really, really appreciate it. I hope everyone is staying safe in these times. Stay positive, stay focused, use this time to be productive and pursue those passions, and perhaps read a couple of books that me and Lyndon have talked about on this episode today. And as always, team, until next time, stay fearless.